Hello again to our discussion on Descartes. And today we are going to, of course, talk about the philosophy of Descartes and Descartes' key concepts like cogito, dubito, madness, God, whatever. So all these things we're going to be talking about abhi ke liye, theek hai? So yeah,
Yeah, hi. So I couldn't really get the reading through and through, but one thing that I really uh, that really stood out for me is that the text in itself, the author tried to put across contrary contentions in that this person, Descartes, he wanted to he wanted to create a more mathematical oriented a foundation for philosophy, so to say, but then he ended up talking about more abstract things and non-rational things. Initially he contended that he believes in rational ideas and all, and as the author in the beginning of the text itself put across this cautionary note that the origin of this philosophy of a rationalistic philosophy, the origin itself does not deal with rationalism. It stands out to be really true towards the end of the text. That's something like.
right. So when we are talking about rationality in context of philosophy, and this is very important when we're talking about Descartes, right? Because Descartes is sort of thought to be like one of the first philosophers. He's called the father of modern philosophy by some scholars. And the reason why he is given such an elevated status because it was the first time that someone way after Plato, Aristotle, all these people was trying to sort of look for answers in thing other than God, as in for the first time here was a person who was looking for a foundation of knowledge other than God. And we had not had that for a long time, right? I mean, who's the last guy who tried to do that? Probably Aristotle and their followers. Yeah. But again, so the point is that when we are talking about our reading of Descartes, the idea of rationality is very important, because what is rationality and what it is contrasted against is one of the hallmarks through which we understand rationality even today, right? So many people ask me when we're discussing Plato, Aristotle, or even Descartes, why the hell are we reading these old philosophers, right? What's the point? Like, why don't we read more contemporary stuff? Why do we go into history of philosophy and sort of dig out these old and sort of irrelevant ideas and try to understand them? Because no one is, of course, just uses whatever Descartes is saying to the point, right? But the point is that we need to understand them, because a lot of the world that we see around today was built on the edifice of these ideas, right? So whatever these people are saying have influenced people throughout history, and on the basis of it, people have constructed institutions, people have constructed norms, people have constructed laws, based on the ideas that these philosophers expounded. So for you to be able to understand these philosophers, is important for you to be able to critique, because there are a lot of these institutions and there are a lot of norms, there are a lot of laws that are built on the ideas by these old philosophers, that you can use the critiques of those philosophers to sort of critique the norms that exist in our society, right? So for example, many people say that the idea of basic structure of the constitution in many ways corresponds to Aristotle's idea of essence, right? Now, if I know what are the critiques of Aristotle's idea of essence and the idea of essentialism, I can go ahead and develop my own critique of the doctrine of basic structure, basically, right? So, the merits and demerits of any system of thought, uh, knowing them sort of helps you analyze the institutions and the structures that are built on the edifice of those ideas, right? So, when we're talking about Descartes, right? Uh, Descartes' idea of rationality, the Descartes' idea of foundation of knowledge, all the sort of things that we observe around us, systems of thought that we observe around that that are built on the edifice of the ideas of Descartes, or at least use or at least built on the edifice of the ideas of the further philosophers who relied on Descartes, right? For them, when we're talking about them, these ideas will really come into you know picture, and helping and to understand their critique would be to understand the critique of these institutions, or to be able to develop the critique of these institutions, right? Because if you study the history of philosophy, it always feels like, okay, one person came, put forward an idea, other person came, criticized them, right? And this just goes on, one person criticizing the previous guy, and everyone rejecting everyone, thinking everyone is wrong. But the point is, the importance is not in the ideas of a thinker that were rejected, but in the ideas of thinker that were accepted. Does not mean they were explicitly expected, even if they were implicitly accepted to be true by the future generation of thinkers. What we have here is basically a norm that is not questioned yet, right? So these ideas which were left unquestioned uh, just find a way into our modern thinking and our modern institution laws, norms, right? So when we are sort of understanding their criticism, we are also trying to you know have a look at what is wrong with our own world, right? So when we're talking about Descartes' idea of rationality, that is a very important thing that we'll be covering, right? A basic idea of what Descartes just trying to do is basically that he was trying to find a foundation of knowledge that is not rested just on faith, right? There should be an idea of the idea of the foundation of knowledge needs to be rested on reason rather than faith, right? Of course, the context in which Descartes is writing is also very important. The Catholic Church has been in control of knowledge, and gets to decide what is good knowledge and what is not good knowledge for basically thousands of years, ever since Constantine Christianized the Roman Empire. Basically, Christianity has had an authority to decide what is knowledge and what is not, right? So what Descartes wanted to do in trying to say that theology or religion is or faith is not a good foundation of knowledge. He was trying to subvert some ideas that of knowledge that were prevalent in his own time, right? And he says that these ideas should be rested in reason. Whether the reason that he implied is good or not, that is a different question, and many people who have come after it have created it. But one of the main ideas is that it should rest on reason. That is important to us, and that is what, of course, what we are going to look at, right? So, of course, Descartes, much like Plato, was very wary of the direction in which our senses lead us, right? Senses can be deceptive, of course. You see things from one angle, they look different. You see things from another angle, they look different, right? You put a stick in water, it just looks different than it was, when it was not in water, right? Things look different at night than they do in day, and you can always, uh, get to things with certainty, right? For example, Descartes gives this example of dreams, right? Whenever we're dreaming, we feel that things are as real as they are in reality, right? So, but it is not reality. We know that, right? So, how do we know that the world that we are living in is not some sort of an eternal dream that has been spun up by some evil demon who's trying to deceive us, right? How do we how do we know that? So for that, we need to go to the foundation of knowledge, to what is it? I can doubt my senses, I can doubt my perception, but what is it that I cannot doubt, right? The first, the first point at which doubt cannot exist is the foundation of knowledge from for Descartes, right? That is from where all knowledge should emerge from, right? So he says that I can doubt, whether this chair exists. I can doubt whether this, my body even, exists. But what I cannot doubt is the fact that I'm doubting, right? You cannot doubt away doubt is a very important assertion by Descartes. You cannot doubt away doubt. So the fact that that we are doubting is for Descartes in some ways self-evident, because that is what we're doing, and because doubting is a form of thinking. So he moves from dubito to cogito. Cogito means thinking, right? Dubito means doubt. So he moves from dubito to cogito, in saying that doubt is a form of thinking. And then from cogito, he says that, but if you're thinking, that there must be something that is thinking, right? And of course, he draws a distinction between mind and body, and that is a very important aspect of his philosophy, right? You may remember how sort of Plato and Aristotle drew a distinction between matter and form, right? And we criticize it as a form of dualism, right? In saying that, okay, you're saying that there is a difference between universal and particular. The universal is the idea, and the particular is particular instances of that idea. So, and at the end of the day, what you have is formless matter. That in itself is also universal because it exists everywhere and save everywhere. So how can there be a form of matter, was a question that was raised, and that was a problem that the philosophers were, like, who came after them, were trying to solve, of this problem of dualism that exists in Descartes as well, in saying that his mind can be separated from his body. So what he basically says, that I can doubt that my body exists, uh, but then he asked it, what is the thing that is thinking, right? Because thinking is an activity which needs to be done by a thing. But if I can doubt my body, what is it about me that I cannot doubt? And that is his mind. So there's a separation of mind and body that he posits, and says that I cannot doubt that my mind exists, right? So I am a thinking thing for Descartes. So therefore, this very popular phrase comes from cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am, right? So that is a proposition that Descartes is, of course, trying to make here, in saying that that I am, that I think, you posit that you exist, otherwise you won't be thinking. And then, of course, the problem arises that you are thinking, you are here, you're right now, you're thinking, and that is why you exist. Okay, you can be certain that right now you exist because you are a thinking thing, but how do you not know that your past, and how do you know that your past and future are real, right? So for example, I have, as a person, I have a whole history behind me. I remember my childhood. I remember how I grew up, right? I remember all this, and I remember everything to the point that I am here. I mean, to not remember in the literal sense, but I can draw a line, right? Descartes posits how, how do we know that this evil demon who's trying to trick us did not just spawn us right now, and everything that that we know of our past has been fabricated by that evil demon, to make us think that reality has existed since always, right? How do we know? For instance, when I was a kid, right? I because we used to count years like 2006, 2007, right? I thought that, okay, the world began in 2000, right? And everything else before that is just fiction. So of course, this is what Derrida is trying to do. Descartes is trying to do here, saying that how do you not know that everything that came before you is just a fabrication that has been planted in your mind? And for that, Descartes says that we need to prove the existence of God, right? And this is also a very important question, as in, what is the nature of Derrida's Descartes' God? Of course, it's not the God in the Christian sense, of course, but he was a believer. But you know it is not in a necessarily Christian way, in the sense that what Descartes is doing here when he's talking about God is not doing theology, he's still doing philosophy. He's talking about God as a foundation for knowledge, right? Which is also very, 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 very important concept, right? And it just does not exist in Descartes, but it existed before Descartes, it existed before Christianity, and it is continuing to exist even after people don't believe in religion, right? So when we're talking about God and philosophy, what we're basically talking about is this idea of an unknowable foundation of everything, right? So an unknowable foundation of knowledge. If you remember in Plato, we were talking about the form of good, right, which serves as a foundation for knowledge, but which cannot be accessed by any manner, right? So in a way, knowledge, the foundation of knowledge is inaccessible. Did he reject the ideas? No, he did not. He did not. But he was talking in about God in a more metaphorical sense. So yeah. So yeah, when he is talking about the idea of God, he's trying to look at a foundation of knowledge, right? Plato tried to do that. So, and even Saint Augustine after him tried to say that Plato is like the guy who came closest to the Christian idea of God, right? And then he thought that, okay, this guy must have plagiarized the Bible from somewhere or something, right? So, yeah, the idea of God is about the foundation of knowledge. And when Nietzsche, if you know about this guy, we'll be talking about him as well. When Nietzsche says that the God is dead, He's not just talking about of course he's talking about the Christian God, but he's not just talking about the Christian God, right? That after coming of reason, we have become smart and somehow we don't believe in God anymore. That is not what he's saying. What Nietzsche will try to do is to subvert this foundation of knowledge, you know, to ask for knowledge without a foundation is what basically he's trying to do, right? What Deleuze, later calls a copy without a model, right? So so what this entire project, that that when you're talking about God and philosophy, it's not just the Christian God, it's not any particular God, it's about God as a foundation of knowledge and a foundation of reality, right? So what Descartes is trying to do here is that, okay, if God is there and the God is all benevolent or whatever, uh, then we know that the God will not deceive us. And if God has implanted us with these memories and stuff, they must be based on some truth, because God is perfection, right? And the perfection cannot deceive, because deception is a form of imperfection, right? So he uses this construction of God. He gives these two proof of God, which are not important, you can look them up, they're in the reading. He gives a priori proof and a posteriori proof, right? A priori means emanating from reason, and a posteriori means emanating from observation, right? So um, so these two proofs is, he sort of gives them to justify the existence of God. You can look them up there in the reading. And on the basis of, says he, that okay, God exists, and that is why we know that there is a present or future, right? So because I am doubting and because I'm a thinking thing, I know that I exist, and I know because God is there, the past and the future exist. That is basically Descartes. So yeah, I hope that that served as a good introduction for anyone who might not have been able to complete the reading. Yeah. So, yeah, any comments, any thoughts, or anything you want to say, that you went through the reading, and there were some things that you wanted to say, or some things that I said which make you think about something. You feel free to express that. It's okay. You can take your time. You can even like open reading on the side if you want to, and you can just take your time, Dheeraj, and like go through the lines, and just ask any doubts that you have, or anything that you did not understand. I can explain that as well. So anything is totally. I mean, you know, whatever you want to. I mean, the purpose of this discussion is to expand your understanding, right? So it doesn't really serve anything if you don't take something back from them. So we can wait. It's all right. Yeah, Chaitanya.
Yeah, I just had a doubt regarding. It wasn't exactly a doubt, but it was regarding the cogito. I couldn't really understand uh, the fact or the assertion that he made that because I'm doubting right now, therefore I must exist. Now,
Mhm.
isn't that a broad assertion to make? Just because you're thinking right now
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily have to mean that you exist too, right? The whole thing that he says about the fact that I am observing something might not exactly exist as I think it exists. Uh,
Mhm.
the whole point about the demon tricking him and all of that. But I mean, this is a not a great example. But what if you have something like the Matrix where you are, because uh, in there you have a world where you can think, but you're not objectively in the real world, right? You're in
Mhm.
a simulation, even though you can think that this is a simulation, but that doesn't mean that you are in the real world. So I can doubt about my existence, but how does that absolutely point to the fact that I exist just because I'm doubting.
So what Descartes is trying to say is that your physical body, you know, in may not exist. By I, he does not mean I as an I am a person who is flesh and blood. What he means is the idea that you would refer to as a soul, right? For example, there is a matter and a form, right? So if you look to Plato will explain soul as the form of you, right? As in the aspect of you which is not material, is what mind is basically, for Descartes. So you cannot know whether you physically exist, but you know that because you're doubting, there is a doubting element somewhere, right? And on the basis of that, he concludes that because you are thinking, doubt is a form of thinking, therefore you must exist. Otherwise, there's nothing cannot doubt, is what he's basically trying to say. But of course, as you pointed out, like that is not, many thinkers who sort of came after that objected as to why this is not a very good argument, right? Many people will say, and I think Nietzsche will most certainly agree, it is not because you doubt that you exist, it is because you exist that you doubt, right? So circular reasoning, right, in many ways. Of course, Descartes tried to evade accusations of circular reasoning, but circular reasoning, nevertheless, I think that it exists in many parts of his thinking. Yeah, that is there.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a small doubt too. There's this line where the author says that therefore God's existence must be conceived as more than possible. How is it more than possible?
Right. So there is a realm of possibility, there is a realm of certainty, right? So what he more than possible means that I won't say more probable, but like it doesn't cut it. There's something between possibility and probability, that certainty that it must lie somewhere like that. Or, he's trying to, aim for certainty. That are the only two things that he can mean by this. Can you point to the exact point of the text where he says that? I'll just reread it, and let's just let you know.
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe it's like he wants to say that it's not impossible. So that's it's page number 15.
Hmm. Probably. Page number 15. Wait a second.
It starts with further last second.
Yeah. Therefore, God's existence is more. Further, Descartes claimed that God's existence cannot be conceived as only possible but not actual. For then, he would not be a necessary existence. And we can conceive God's existence, it is not contradictory. Therefore, God's existence must be conceived as more than possible. V is the actual. Okay. Hmm, 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 hmm. He's aiming at certainty basically. So what he's saying that it should be more than possible. I mean, it should tend to certainty. It should not be It should not be left hanging as a probability, right? Because probability, just because God can exist does not mean that he necessarily does exist, right? So either you have an a posteriori proof that you can physically witness God, which is not possible by the very definition of the concept, right? So if you just leave it as a possibility, the existence of a God as a possibility, you may as well negate the existence of God, right? Because if a thing is non-existent in the material world, it either is necessary, right? For example, existence of reason, some may say is necessary because we are reasoning, that reason is necessary, is a logical necessity. It does not physically exist, but it is logical reasoning. The same with God, that it must be a logical necessity, even if it does not exist physically. So what he's trying to do is, at well saying it's more than possible, is that he's aiming at certainty. Yeah.
Or can you say that he somewhere means that there's no other possible explanation Like there has to be a God, वरना और कैसे explain करे?
Yeah, exactly. That is what he's saying. Adna. He's basically saying that if God does not exist, nothing will make sense, right? So for it to make sense, God must exist, and therefore God exists, is what he's trying to say, and that is how he grounds knowledge in a sort of a transcendent figure, whether it be mind. Because if you look at it, mind and God are both transcendent in some sense, right? They're not part of the physical material world, right? So knowledge is transcendent in Descartes' system. Mind is the imperfect, source of knowledge. God is the perfect source of knowledge. So the distinction between mind and God is just a distinction of perfection and imperfection, right?
Right, great, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you have any more, yeah, Arjun.
Right. So I have a question with regards to the flow from I doubt to I think to I am. And in specific, um, the part where he says I am is implied through I think. So he says that Descartes says that the mind is a thinking thing and that he cannot doubt its existence. But then he says that the body is an extended thing and then he can doubt its existence. So the notion of I am, does it refer to the mind being in existence, or does it refer to the mind and body as a whole being in existence?
Yeah, only the mind, not the body.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, Shambhavi.
Yeah, so
Or
I
also,
had it.
if I mispronounce anyone's name, please feel free to correct me as rudely as you want, please.
No, that was fine.
Yeah.
So I basically had a doubt about a priori proof for God. Like, it is where Descartes mentions the logical necessary condition to uh, for anything's existence, and then he goes on to say that it is logically necessary to affirm that a necessary existence does exist. So I did not really understand this
Yeah.
part.
Okay. So basically, he's drawing from Saint Anselm, like who was a Christian philosopher, right? What he basically tried to do is to prove by the existence of God is like by saying that God is the perfect, it is the best, and it is the most wonderful thing that has ever that can exist, right? So, and he then gave an argument. Okay, what is and he here assumes that existence is a good, right? So then he says that what is more fun than what is more sorry, not fun, what is more perfect and good and awesome than a thing, the idea of a thing that exists, right? So the most fun, the most awesome, and the most best thing ever should exist, right? So he sort of he sort of assumed perfection to be part of existence, right? So he proved the existence of God by saying that what is better than a perfect thing that exists. So if you move any level down, then that would be imperfection. So perfect thing must exist, but it was of course a very flawed argument, but because this way you can prove the existence of anything, right? For example, I can say the most amazing computer in the world, which sort of gives me a download speed of 3 terabytes per second, is the best thing that can ever be, right? So therefore it must exist, because if it is the best, then it is the perfect, then perfect of and existence, an existing thing is better than non-existing thing, therefore it must exist. But this is a flawed line of view, because you can prove anything with that, right? So it's circular, it is flawed. And that is, I think, he sort of tries to rehash the claim of Saint Anselm here, where by he's saying that the sort of a logical existence, and a similar critique was drawn to Descartes in one of the further paragraphs. I think it was one Christian theologian only, Pierre Gassendi, right? Yeah, that just because that no, I think it was one of the other ones, I don't know. Caterus basically says that the idea of the existence, I can be wrong, just correct me, it's been a while since I read that thing. Yeah. So what basically this objector to Descartes said, that the idea of an existent line, just because you can conceptualize it, does not mean that the lion physically exists, right? So for that you need an a posteriori proof. You know, you need to physically observe it. So that is one of the objection that was drawn to it. Of course, it's not a very good argument that, you know, if you conceptualize anything as an existent thing and you prove that it can be possible, therefore it must be possible. It's a bit, it's a bit of a leap. Yeah. Any a follow up?
No, thank you.
Okay, okay, okay. Yogita.
So I had a question, like you mentioned about the circular thought that Descartes adopt in his
Hmm.
teaching of the thought. So he mentions about the from world to God. Generally, all the philosophers were talking about world to God, but he
Hmm.
tries to bring out that it is from God to world. So
Hmm.
he tries to mention that God cannot deceive us, and neither he believes that there is some external source that is driving us.
Hmm.
So does he actually advocates existence of God, or tries to just cover it over when there is no substantive proof of God?
See, he, in trying to offer a proof of God and, you know, this world to God and, you know, God to world existence, I'll just explain what he's trying to do. He says that theology, you know, what it does, you know, in theorizing the existence of God, is that it you know, starts from the world and tries to prove the existence of God and explain how things unroll from there on, right? But Descartes, what he's trying to do is using God as a foundation for everything that is down here, right? So when you are theorizing the existence of God, what you're doing is that you're assuming that you and everything around you exists. Now you have to prove the existence of God. He's doing the opposite. He's saying, I'm doubting everything that exists here, and I'm, you know, offering a proof from God. I'm saying that everything just unfolds from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one more question, like
Hmm.
he talks about the existence of soul in relation to the thought, but
Hmm.
he also mentions that the relationship with the external world is through senses, and
Hmm.
senses do confuse us.
Hmm.
So he's correlating thought and with the senses. So could you please
Hmm.
explain this distinction? Like on one hand, he mentions about the false ideas that we conceive through our senses, and on the other, it's the thought that reveals us the real knowledge.
Um, yeah, I sorry, I got confused. Can you repeat your question, like the main part of your question?
Descartes, talking about the proof of existence of soul,
Hmm.
correlates it with the thought, and he says that the relationship between thought and external world is through senses. But he also mentions that,
Between thought and external world? Wait, yeah, sorry.
yeah, between thought and external world.
No, no, thought is independent of, you know, thought, reason, rationality. That is different from senses, right? Senses is, you know, so and empirical knowledge is the knowledge that you get from observation, right? Rational knowledge is the knowledge you get from thinking, you know, from reason. For example, mathematics is an example of rational knowledge, right, that proceeds from reason. And whatever you see around us, you know that this bottle is red is because you are seeing that. So there is a distinction that was maintained by early thinkers between empiricism and rationalism, which was not uh, sort of you know, merged till Kant. And, you know, we'll talk about Kant and we talk about Kant. So yeah, what exactly is the question here? Like, was there a confusion per se?
Like he mentions about the principle of interactionism.
Hmm. Hmm.
So he's saying that the substance of the soul to him is the attribute of thought. And then he goes on explaining how we perceive thought and the other thing.
Okay, can you point me to the paragraph?
It is the proof of the existence of soul, the very first.
Proof of the existence of soul. Yeah,
Page
okay, okay.
16.
Got it, got it, got it, got it. Hmm. There exists a principle of interactionism, the body affecting the mind and the mind affecting the body. Yeah. Descartes contend that since the mind was an immaterial self, this conclusion supplied sufficient belief of mind's survival after the death of the body. Since it is immaterial, it could exist after the body's dissolution. The basic problem about the nature of man is posed as follows: how can the immaterial mind of ideas initiate or determine direction of material sensing body? These two different substances are independent of each other, and in Descartes' work Passions of the Soul, he considered the pineal gland in the brain, for which they knew no function, as the point where the body and the mind meet. Another problem arose. It's basically about Descartes' dualism, right? So acha, that is where question is aimed at. Hello, is it lagging?
No, maybe for Yogita lagging, but it is not
uh,
lagging.
Hello, Yogita. I can see she's on the meet. It's lagging, Shambhavi?
We
No,
can
no,
hear
it's not lagging.
Oh,
No,
okay.
it's not.
Okay, so I think we have lost Yogita for. Oh, okay, we'll ask, like, what, we'll clarify her doubt when she's online. Mohammed Ahmed.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to ask that when he says that God cannot deceive us or
Mhm,
deception is a sign of imperfection, so
mhm.
he doesn't give any basis or rational basis for this, and he starts
What
everything.
is a sign of imperfection? Sorry,
Deception.
deception is a sign of
Yeah, yeah.
imperfection.
So
Yeah.
I isn't it in itself a belief that deception is sign of imperfection. So if
Hmm. Hmm.
he starts believing everything
Hmm.
from rational perspective, then in this text I cannot see where uh, it's
Hmm.
really a gap for me to understand that
Hmm. Hmm.
how God cannot deceive us or
Hmm.
deception is a sign of imperfection.
Right, right. So I think you can claim it, like, of course, it is a belief that he does not justify, but there is a belief that he assumes to be true. Reasons for that may be that because we think that deception is a bad thing, right? It is a vice. It is not a quality that we would want in human beings, right? So, and a society that is based on deception is not a good society. I don't know. Yeah, you can take your guess. Perhaps he's coming from the Christian tradition, where deception can be considered a sin, so to speak, and to say that God can sin is an idea that does not make sense, right? So yeah, of course, it is another. So that is the problem with all these people who are sort of trying to prove a foundation for knowledge without taking any assumption, is that they end up taking assumptions in the end, right? Or just in the process of giving their proof for the first thing, they sort of assume some other things which should flow from the first idea. So yeah, in many ways, that is why the idea of the first idea is out of our reach, right? So there's very less point in talking about it. So yeah, I mean, that is a very good. I mean, you can draw sort of objections to many of these ideas, but that is only if you sort of disagree that deception is, uh, you know, that deception is an imperfection. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, got it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
according to him, what is the relationship between soul and the mind?
What is the relationship between the soul and the mind? That's a good question. Um, See, I think what that, and I'm just guessing here because I don't really know the answer. Probably you need to look at scholarly sources as to what exactly is the distinction between mind and soul. But from what I understand by reading Descartes is that they're very interrelated concepts, right? Mind is also like an immaterial part of body that sort of that sort of represents the ideal part of what is material. The body is material, mind is ideal, right? I think he's talking about soul in a sense that we understand soul, right, as a part of our own self, that lives after, that lives even after we die, right? So because the mind, and by that extension soul, it represents a part of body that is immaterial. Material, events like death do not have an impact on it. It will continue to exist even after we die, so to speak. So that is, I think, what he's trying to do here. Again,
Yeah,
but
because
you have
he
to cross check it, part, because I'm not very sure on this.
yeah, because he goes on to talk about the proof of the existence of a soul, and then he like intermingles it with the idea of mind. So I got
Hmm.
confused.
Hmm. Hmm. Talks about it, I think. Yeah. Hmm. Although the mind as such is purely intellectual, it interacts with sense experiences, the imagination, the memory as a reference of the material object. The substantial commingling of the mind and body is a contingent union. It is only by the fact of experience that there can be a certainty of existence of this composite unity. Moreover, this notion is not able to be proven a priori through scientific deduction. Right. The unity of composition is a fact shown by experience, even though its nature is incomprehensible. Hmm. Right, right, right. Any other questions that anyone has? Any follow-ups that anyone has? Um, Otherwise, we'll move to the next leg of our discussion.
I had a question. It's not a follow up
Yeah.
really, but it's from the text. Um, so the fourth criticism says that his method is unnecessarily skeptical. Why doubt the obvious, for example, that I exist? Now, how is this a good criticism now? And the fifth criticism, just following it, says that his argument has an unproven assumption that something exists, but it is logical possible that nothing exists or ever did. Now, if you say that there is a possibility that nothing exists, why would you say that his method is unnecessarily skeptical? Because that doesn't exactly make sense, right?
So yeah, it basically, these are like ideas that are coming from two ends of thinking, so to speak, right? One is the materialist thinking कि bro तू बहुत ज़्यादा doubt कर रहा है, ठीक है? And then the skeptic is saying that though, like, you're not doubting anything at all, right? Because you are, you're sort of assuming the existence of something which sort of goes on to, you know prove everything. So these are like thinking, thoughts that are coming from two very different camps, right? Skepticism was like a school of philosophy that came sort of after, Aristotle, in what we call the Hellenistic age, right? The Hellenistic age was the age after that we, period in Greek history that we refer, that we, talk about, that exists after the death of Alexander. So that is somewhere between 300 BC to 100 something BC, right? Which is basically the age where three schools gained, major prominence. Three philosophical schools gained major prominence. One was skepticism, one was Epicureanism, and the other was Stoicism, right? Skepticism, yeah. Stoicism in many ways is sort of thought to be, cynicism was also a school, but Stoicism is supposed to be sort of the forerunner, like, cynicism was supposed to be the forerunner to Stoicism, so they're both thought of as not very distinct. So these three schools, Epicureanism, skepticism, Stoicism, were majorly popular. They sort of preach different things, right? So Epicureanism was a materialist philosophy, right? So he would be the guy who would say to Descartes that the Epicurus, the master of Epicurean philosophy, after whom it is named, Epicurus would say that this objection, the materialist objection, that he's doubting too much. And someone like Pyrrho, I think Pyrrho was the skeptic philosopher. Yeah, he would say that that you're not doubting enough, so to speak. So yeah, so these are the schools of thought that that these criticisms come from. You may say that they have some weight to it, right? For example, Marx would not bother, because he's a materialist philosopher. He would not bother with asking these questions like, "Oh, do I even exist?" Right? He'd say that these are stupid questions, because that implies an idea of reality, right? That may not be useful, right? That what we call ontology, right? So for an idealist, it is what exists is always a function of our mind, right? And our mind has to decide, whether something exists or it does not exist, whether something is reality or it is not reality. And if the mind is continuously being deceived, we need to find some foundation for it, or some way in which we can arrive at truth, right? But for people for whom that existence has nothing to do with mind, and something that exists is just out there, for them, all these questions will sound very stupid, right? So for Marx, he thought that all this discussion is just something that people who have too much money and don't have to care for their own food and their clothing and their shelter just do for fun, right? So this distinction between idealism and materialism was very contrastly, sort of highlighted by Marx, and he says that it also implies some idea of the self, right? If you can go around just saying that, does this chair exist, that just that just defines some relation of yourself with the world, which a person who, for example, has to work 16 hours a day just to make a living will not have the time for, right? For them, they are not sort of subjects, they are for them, for them they're objects. They're not acting upon the world, they're being acted upon. So materialist philosophy and Marxist philosophy is concerned with the things that are acted upon, right, rather than things that act. So yeah, so that is why Marx talks about historical processes that lead to change, the overall narrative, instead of just what a few bunch of people who might have very idealist notions of what the world is might think about. So yeah, this contrast between materialism and materialism and idealism, between rationalism and empiricism, all these things will play out in great detail as the drama of that we call the Western historical canon will unroll. I think I stayed too far from asking what your question was. Sorry.
No, no, no. Makes sense. Makes sense.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Hmm. All right. So, yeah, if you don't have any further questions, let's move on to the next leg of our discussion that I really want to bring up because of its relevant to you as law students, right? Can someone read me section 84 of IPC? Is someone doing it?
No.
Yeah,
That
shall
the
I?
act of a person of an unsound mind.
Wait, sorry. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead. One of you go ahead.
Okay, I will.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Section 84 in the Indian Penal Code. Act of a person of unsound mind. Nothing is an offense which is done by a person who, at the time of doing it, by reason of unsoundness of mind, is incapable of knowing the nature of the act, or that he is doing what is either wrong or contrary to law.
Amazing, fantastic. Just, I love this section because there's so much to pick out here, right? We've just talked about the mind, we just talked about what rationality is. Now we're talking about madness. Yeah. Soumya, okay. Soumya, thank you for staying there. Okay. So yeah, now let's get to the interesting bit. Descartes has, of course, talked about the mind a lot. He's talked about rationality a lot, and in many ways, for a lot of philosophers, what Descartes did was a privileging of reason and a certain way of thinking, right? That that Descartes is doing, and that has influenced the rest of the Western historical canon. In that, everyone is trying to look for a foundation, or everyone is trying to look for, if not a single foundation, just a way to explain things or render them sensible, right? Um, so this discussion just carries on from Descartes, so to speak. And in doing so, in giving this privileged place to reason, we have constructed a society that sort of has kind of forgotten about madness in some senses, and that is what a philosopher Michel Foucault would. Uh, okay, there is an orientation that is happening right now.
for a part of a class. Like some
Ah,
kids have to join.
okay. So rest of you are free, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. कोई बात नहीं, they will access the recording if they want to. Okay. So yeah, so when we're talking about rationality, the other part of it is, of course, something that we might call irrationality or madness, so to speak, right? And Michel Foucault, he's a pretty recent philosopher, died in the 80s, right? In his text, Madness and Civilization, what he tried to sort of do is construct a history of madness, right? And in doing so, what he tried to sort of show is that how there is a privileged position that reason has been kept in, and madness, so to speak, has been silenced. And that is a very particular trope of enlightenment and of a society which sort of privileges reason, right? That happened after enlightenment, renaissance, whatever, right? So hi Manya, glad to have you here. um, did you do the reading? Otherwise, you won't get the context of what's happening here.
Hello, I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I was like stuck in traffic. Yeah, I've done the readings. And where are you? Like, for a bit of
Okay.
context.
So we are discussing section 84 of the IPC for some reason. so,
Oh, fun. Okay, I
yeah,
understand.
okay. So basically, what we are talking about is Descartes has talked a lot about mind. Descartes has talked a lot about rationality, and section 84 of the IPC is basically says that a person who's of unsound mind, right? That person is incapable of committing any offense, so to speak, right? Now we're trying to analyze the idea of madness from Michel Foucault's, Madness and Civilization. So yeah, so in Madness and Civilization, what Foucault was trying to do was to sort of to construct a history of history of madness, and how the privileged position that philosophers after Descartes sort of gave to reason, you know, that privileged position sort of act as something that silenced madness, right? So what it basically, I'll explain what he means here. There's a lot to unpack here. So and he says that this silencing of madness is a very specific you know product of the enlightenment, of the renaissance, of the thought of that period, right, where there was this privileging of reason. So he says that in the ancient world, if you look at the Greeks, if you look at even as far as the writings of Shakespeare, you will see that there is a celebration of madness in some sense. In some sense, the people who are rendered to be mad sort of possessed a special type of knowledge, right? In Shakespeare texts, if you've read any, you can see how the people who were sort of the jesters, or who were sort of the comic relief characters, they were some of the sharpest, and they were supposed to be know things that ordinary people might not know, right? Because they were so smart and everything, because they were witty, and etc etc. So, and even in Greek society, people uh, who were who were mad were considered to be blessed by some sort of by some sort of deity or something, right? So they were not institutionalized like they were in the Enlightenment. What happened after the age of Enlightenment is that we started, to because in the ancient world, the mad sort of lived with the reason, the quote unquote reasonable, right, in their society, in their company, everything. But what happened with the upcoming of psychiatry as a discipline is that the mad were supposedly institutionalized, right? They were kept in these sort of in these sort of institutions where they were supposed to behave a certain way, they were supposed to act in a certain way, and that sort of served as a silencing tactic, in the sense that the what madness was for Foucault, madness was silence in these institutions. They were not allowed to speak for themselves, right? What were they doing, right? Basically, a person who is mad cannot contract on their own behalf. A person who is mad cannot be considered liable for an offense. A person who is mad cannot marry, or inherit property, etc etc, whatever the laws did to them. So in a sense, the quote unquote mad was stripped of their of their agency, right? And they would say, okay, you cannot exercise this right that you have. The state will exercise this right for you, or your family will exercise this right for you, right? So what effectively is happening is that the madness is being tried to silence here, right? And of course Foucault has a very special bone to pick with Descartes here, right? In Madness and Civilization, what he's trying to do is trying to construct an archaeology of madness, so to speak, and in the process to let madness speak for itself, right? So this privileging of reason over madness for Foucault is nothing that is inherent, right? It is very perspectival in nature, in the sense that what we construct, when what we consider reasonable and what we consider as madness is something that is contingent on the way that society accepts or rejects what is knowledgeable and what is knowledge and what is madness, right? What is reason and what is madness. For instance, if something like uh, whatever Descartes is doing, like he's going like, bro, I don't know whether this chair exists or not. Need to construct a transcendent being to sort of justify whether this chair exists or not. If it was not Descartes, one of the most educated and one of the most well acclaimed persons of his, intellectuals of his time, if it was not him he was doing it, it was some random guy off the road, would you think that person be considered the epitome of reason as Descartes was considered, or would he consider it as mad, right? So there is a manner of speech that reason adopts, by which by pursue by the by virtue of which it can be considered as reason, right? And this what Foucault is trying to say is that this boundary between reason and madness is very flimsy, so to speak, right? And for instance, let's just take another example. If you go to a person in the 1400s, right, and you tell them that the world is round, right, like a person today will think that okay, you're being perfectly reasonable. If you go to a person in 1400s, they just look at the horizon and they'll say, yeah, this guy's mad, right, because the world is not round. It is because the certain tools that we have at our disposal that we are able to assess this idea and call, and we are able to pass judgment on what is true and what is not, which in itself is a matter of perspective, so to speak, right? Depends on where you're standing, right? What did this guy say, uh, Einstein, right? Motion is relative, right? So whether you subscribe to the geocentric model or the heliocentric model is mainly a matter of perspective, because if at the end of the day motion is entirely perspectival, it does not matter whether the sun is revolving around the earth or the earth is revolving around the sun, right? So because motion in that sense is relative. So what exactly is just the difference between them is that one explains phenomena better than the other. There's no notion of truth that when we attach to either of them, right? So in the same sense, he's going in the same way and saying that this barrier between reason and madness that is trying to be drawn by enlightenment philosophers is not as cut in stone as we think that it is, right? And we see today, even like in liberal theories, so who sort of subscribe to the ideas of rationalism, we see in them an attempt to sort of reclaim, sort of to include the so-called the people who were rendered mad back into the society. Look at the UN Convention on Rights of the Person with Disabilities, right? What it tries to do is says that no, you cannot have like a guardian administering the the property of a person just because that person is lacks what do you say is has a mental disability, right? That you just do not go and say that, oh, the state will handle your affairs or your family will handle affairs, your guardian will handle. No, if they need support to exercise that sort of the sort of right, then they should be given that support, right? Whether it be in form of helpers or machinery or whatever, right? Whatever support they see, you should give them that support instead of just ruling them out as not being a part of this community of rational people that we have constructed around us, so to speak, right? And I don't know which judge was this, some English judge who says that the human mind is as much a reason seeking machine as the as the snot of a pig. So what, this privileged place that we are placing reason and saying that humans are rational, and excluding everyone who does not is not in our understanding of reason, is does not fall in the aspect of fall in this very close circle that we consider to be reasonable people. Anyone who falls outside that is considered to be illegitimate, right? And that is a huge historical problem, right? And I wanted to take this section as a segue from Descartes, because Descartes talks about reason so much, and because sort of because his work privileged reason in such a manner that continues to impact the rest of the Western philosophical canon, right? So this classical reason that we are talking about, uh, the classical reason as an institution, if you can call it that, sort of began with Descartes for many people. And when we are talking about Descartes, this is a part of his philosophy that sort of is left out, I feel. Many philosophy classes, what they do is that they just call you in, teach you one philosopher, and then another philosopher, and who will say that everything the previous guy said was trash, what I am saying is correct, and so on and so on. It does not really help anyone, right? What we are concerned with is the elements of their thought that were preserved even after their rejection, and that continue to influence us even today, right? So yeah, I'm going to provide you some further readings if you're interested, or you can look it up. But these are some very important questions which I'm not delving into great detail, because of course we'll come to that when we're talking about Foucault and Derrida and all these people who will talk about it. So I'm just giving you a hint, because this is I think what should be your takeaway as students of law from this entire discussion, right? And whenever you sort of see, because all these provisions that we study, right, insanity, incapacity of people with mental disability or whatever, we just take it in the passing, ye to hai, right? Like, this is very natural, because these people cannot think, so we need someone reasonable, quote unquote reasonable, to take decisions on their behalf, right, without questioning whether this provision or whether this incapacity that is being instituted by the law, is it rational, is it whatever, does it pass the scrutiny that it is supposed to. I mean, we are depriving someone of their right. I mean, we should be more vigilant when we are talking about something like this. So yeah, these are some things that I want you to think, I want you to take away from this session. Whenever you are reading any provision that sort of talks about rationality, the rational man standard, I think you must be studying that in taught. Always see that with a bit of skepticism as to what this rationality applies with, who exactly is being talked about, whose rationality is being referred to. All right. Yeah. Any question, comments, anything? I think I am done with my speaking part. Now it's just you guys, if you have any comments on it. Of course, I'm not expect you to be have a lot of like original observation, because this is not something I gave you in the reading, right? After the main discussion, I just took this as a segue. I will give you readings on this, don't worry. But yes, I thought that this is important, because I wanted to highlight a certain aspect of Descartes' philosophy. Yes, Manya. You're on mute. All right. If anyone else has any question, they can also ask.
Yes, I hope you can hear me now.
Mhm.
I just want to point out that, this discussion was particularly interesting because it really tells you why the Enlightenment was so important.
Mhm.
Because the emphasis on reason as opposed to pure sanity, because before that, sanity was essentially conforming to authority. Like,
Mhm.
why do you believe in the geocentric model? We believe because some people, the church, has said that everything revolves around the earth. Whereas the Enlightenment, and particularly the work of Descartes, for example, I think he started one of his works by just proclaiming that whatever I'm writing without considering any prior thoughts that have been done on this subject.
Mhm.
So it was a pure process of deduction, and that is what reasoning actually is.
Mhm.
So, as opposed to rationality being a certain confirmation to authority, it became a true process of reason that you gather facts and then make inferences out of it.
Right. So was that a question or was that a comment?
No, no, it was just a comment,
Ah,
clarifying.
okay, okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that is very true. But if you were there in our discussion, sort of what we did is that
Yeah, could anyone tell me what all did you discuss? Because like I'd really like to catch up for the next class.
Did you do the readings?
Yes. तो वही मतलब
Huh.
those readings. अच्छा,
Yeah.
okay. The mandatory one, right?
Yeah, just the mandatory one.
Okay, thank you so much.
Right.
Is he going to join back or yeah?
yeah, sorry, I ran out of data. Actually, I was using my Wi-Fi has been acting up, so I was using my phone data. Anyway, yeah, sorry, did I miss something?
No, no, I was just asking for, what all you did.
Ah, yeah, yeah. So
We were just
basically,
wondering
yeah,
if you were.
yeah. If
No,
you
we were just wondering if you were speaking or not.
no, 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 no. I realized that I was the connection was weak. Anyway, so yeah, so what basically that we did was that that although Descartes sort of claimed to be all reasonable or all no just deducting from the scratch, there was of course things that he did assume, right? And that is a part of his criticism, right? I think one of the people, I don't know who it was, Arjun, I no no someone else, who said that how do you know that deception is an imperfection, right? That is something that he states but he does not prove, right? That is something that he assumes, so to speak. And of course the nature of thinking and doubt, like that same problem is that how do you go from cogito to sum and not from sum to cogito, right? Circular reasoning, right? How do you like, is it because I think therefore I am, or is it because I am therefore I think, right? So of course there are many objections can be drawn to it. There are can be many assumptions that can be picked from Descartes' own thinking. So that is why this idea that he was just being perfectly reasonable without making any assumptions can also be challenged, is basically, and as was challenged by later thinkers, of course, is what we were trying to say in the discussion that preceded. And it is on the basis of that we built that since Descartes assertion are reasonable only in a certain idea of reason, right? If we that is, of course, we call the classical reason. Then how do we, of course, and then of course we talk about Foucault and how he thinks that rationality and subjectivity, these things are constructed. These things are not given. They're like they're made, and they're made because they're human institutions in many ways, rather than being some sort of external, eternal, transcendent, whatever. So yeah. So that is what we are trying to say there. Anyway, anything else?
You used two words earlier. One was cogito and the other one was like similarly, which rhymed up.
Dubito.
What does it mean?
Doubt.
Oh, okay.
That's there in the reading. Dubito, cogito, sum. From doubt to thinking to being.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Manya.
I had a question. How does Descartes carry his ideas forward per se? For instance, because the process of reasoning he follows, sort of, making a basket of verified questions, and that, I exist, okay, God also exists. The fact is that there are limited things that you can prove following this form of reasoning. So is that a criticism, or is that some authors take up and clarify for Descartes?
Basically, there are limited things that you can prove, but that is okay for Descartes, because there are only limited things that you need to prove in order to be able to, so what he's trying to do, he's trying to find a foundation of knowledge, right? Once you have the foundation, you can build the building yourself, right? So what is important for Descartes is trying to find a foundation for knowledge, right? So he says that mind and God are basically what he says, like, his two edifices on which his entire system is built. I know, because I am here at this moment and I am thinking, and that I need to be something to be able to think, because I need to be a thinking thing, and I cannot doubt its own existence. Therefore I exist. And by I, he does not mean I his physical self, but I his mind. There's a separation between mind and body there. He says that my mind exists, my body, I don't know if it exists or not. That can be doubted. I cannot doubt my mind. So that is how he knows that he is here and now. How does he know that he's in the past, in the future as well? How does he know that this entire past was built, manufactured by this evil demon who sort of conjured this memory in his head? Because of the existence of God, and a benevolent God will not deceive us. So past and the future are accounted for by God, and the present is accounted for by the mind. So, and distinction between the mind and God is just that the mind is the imperfect thinking thing, and God is the perfect thinking thing, so to speak.
All right. And did anyone carry his ideas forward of like using this process to first start with answering a few questions and then forming a skeleton for essentially what would be subsequent philosophical questions? Like you
Right. So
start
the
with
idea
yourself, then
foundation.
God, and so on and so
I
forth.
mean, people before that have tried to do this, but in a very different way. For example, Plato, in trying to formulate a form of good, right? He was trying to sort of come near that idea, right? That this foundation for knowledge, which we cannot access, but it exists because it is a logical necessity, so to speak. So yeah, I don't think that anyone. I think Leibniz, in some ways, Leibniz calls himself God's lawyer. So that is one trial that you should definitely watch, where he's trying to defend the existence of God. So yeah, but even Leibniz did not go in that manner. He sort of started from a basic building block that he called the monad, but it isn't the same process that Descartes followed. Descartes' method is his own, because he was a mathematician as well. So he was trying to use the methods of mathematics in trying to, in mathematical methods of deduction to come up with a proof of God which cannot be doubted, so to speak. Proof of mind and God and existence that cannot be doubted. So I think that is kind of unique to Descartes. Anything
All right,
else?
got it. It's actually very interesting. The theory certain people have founded about the existence of God, in which they try to use reason to prove its existence. There was a German writer Gödel, there was Descartes, and there were many others. So they're quite interesting to analyze, whatever
Oh yeah,
reasons they
extremely.
use.
If you find the time, also watch the discussion that happened at the beginning. Some very interesting observations made and some very interesting comments. So yeah, Apart from that, I think, do we have any more questions, any more doubts? We are nearing the end, 5:30. Yeah, Chaitanya.
Um, did Descartes' ideas and the ideas of the Enlightenment have political consequences? So, for example, the French Revolution. So, did that come about because of the Enlightenment, or did Descartes' ideas have any role to
See,
play in
idea
that?
of rationalism, certainly. Uh, Descartes' philosophy sort of influenced most of the thought that came after him in many ways. He's not referred to as the father of modern philosophy or nothing, of course. In terms of, are you talking in terms of, like, the influence that his ideas had in other thinkers, which sort of later led to some consequence in the future, or are you talking about his immediate political beliefs, so to speak?
I think both actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's very, very natural. जो उसका long term impact था उसका reason पे, and that how we should think, sort of deduce things from reason and not just from faith. That had, of course, a huge impact on the entirety of sort of Western political thought, right? Locke, for instance, I think if I have to name a philosopher whom Descartes had like the biggest influence, of course, he did not accept everything that Descartes said, but I think that this would be the guy in the political tradition. I'd say that Locke is the guy. But again, there are differences. There are a lot of differences. Um, Politically, because Descartes is an idealist thinker, he could be juxtaposed with a thinker like Hobbes, who was a materialist, right? Hobbes said that, what was the most popular political theory of that time? It was what do you call it? The divine right theory, right? That the king gets to rule because he is the god's representative on earth and has the authority over you, so to speak. So divine right theory was the most popular theory of its time, which sort of granted legitimacy to the monarch, right? Hobbes did not believe that. Hobbes rejected the divine right theory because he was a materialist, and I think you'll read him very soon in your political science classes. Hobbes rejected these idealistic views, and Hobbes and Descartes personally knew each other, and they were, of course, you can tell that they were not very good friends. Descartes even thought that what Hobbes was trying to do is to undermine the authority of, intellectual authority of Descartes, and was trying to sort of push himself at the expense of his own repute. And that there's a lot of squabble. You can read all the gossip on Stanford Encyclopedia. Life wala section, very interesting. Um, Other than that, yeah. So because he was an idealist, I'm pretty sure that he supported the divine right theory because he was French. You can just put him in the monarchical camp, so to speak. Even Hobbes was a monarchist, but yeah, he believed that that is the best way, not because of some divine right of the king, but because to prevent the world from going to chaos, which he called the state of nature, which would be if we do not accept the authority of a very strong figure like a monarch or whatever. So I think that would be his most you know immediate political belief, I'd say.
But it wouldn't be right to say that a revolution that was aimed towards basically destroying the status quo as it existed, it would not be right to say that it was fueled by the ideas of people like Descartes.
Not directly, not directly. People who were influenced by Descartes, sure. People who took up the mantle of reason and said that reason should justify rule and not faith, not authority. All these thinkers of that sort. Social
Also,
contract thinkers, for
yeah, yeah.
instance, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, which you'll study in political science.
Also, a political revolution is broadly fueled by the common populace, right? So if I say that the ideas of philosophers influences a revolution or influenced a revolution, would it be right to say that these ideas disseminated among the common populace. So would it be
Oh
right
yeah,
to
yeah,
say?
yeah. See, that is what one of the things that fueled enlightenment, right? The creation of the printing press, by which information could be, unlike in the olden times where you have to read from manuscript, which took a lot of pains to be created. With the advent of the printing press, ideas could be disseminated at a much faster rate, right? Same way as you look at here, for example, if you look at 20 years ago, 30 years ago, ideas were not being disseminated at this pace, at a pace that are being disseminated now that we have internet, right? We are more aware, we are more knowledgeable, we are engaging in more knowledge because by the virtue of the fact that we have it at our disposal, right? So yeah, I mean the change in the medium of communication just helps to sort of disseminate knowledge faster. You can't have something like this in the ancient times because the only the ruling class, sort of the aristocratic class, had access to knowledge, right? But there, because of the upcoming capitalist class, which was not past necessarily part of the aristocracy, because of this class coming up, rich people, merchants who were not, after Adam Smith's ideas, and after trade sort of really blew up, and we had people who were getting rich who were not part of the aristocratic
The
class, were not part of
bourgeoisie.
the bourgeoisie, exactly. So after the upcoming of the bourgeoisie, what you basically have is that which sort of gave a challenge to aristocracy for power, right? And these people, by the virtue of money, had access to knowledge, right? It was just not limited to the aristocratic ruling class. That is in some ways fueled revolutions like the French and the American Revolution.
I had like a small question. Can I still go ahead with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, if I just talk about the 17th century, you talked about this before. You have a guy like Descartes who doesn't have to work for 16 hours a day. He is well off and he is talking about idealistic things. Like, does this table really exist? Now, what kind of people were reading this stuff? Just the intellectuals, or I mean, you talked about the printing press. So, were people, the common people, reading about the ideas of Descartes, or was that something beyond their scope of things or comprehension?
Take a guess, dude. Take a wild guess.
Uh, I don't think I have to.
Yeah. I mean, it took time, right? ऐसा नहीं कि printing press के आते ही सबके हाथ में book आ गया. Of course, then also printing was expensive, and you need to have some money to be able to afford books and to afford an education. Just buying books is not enough. You also need education to understand the contents of that book. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, books were not like the prized gold level sort of commodity anymore. They could be bought, but then also need to be understood, and education was again limited. Yeah. Anything else? All right, then we're already over the time, so I think we should close. All right, thank you very much, everyone, for
Thank you.
joining. Okay,
Thank you.
see you all in the next discussion, I think. Yeah, bye.